You're listening to the Platform Launchers podcast. I'm John Stange, and it's great to have you with us again this week. This week, we're going to be talking about a subject that I think is sometimes difficult to talk about, but it's also, I think, pretty necessary if we're ultimately going to grow in what we're trying to do. We're going to be talking about blind spots and identifying some of those blind spots. And I hope that this will be useful if you're in the process of developing some online content, if you're in the process of developing an online platform like our members club is. We've got so many members developing different things on different subjects, and some things come easy for us. And some things, I think, as individuals, we discover that there's certain elements of platform development or even the subject matter that we try to talk about that can sometimes be a little bit more difficult to share or a little more difficult to gain some traction on. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that for our topic this week. But before we get into that, just want to tell you a little something that kind of reminded me about this. The other day, I had the opportunity to park on my son's college campus. I had stopped over to his college campus to actually go to a sporting event. It was a volleyball game. And several people we knew were going to be playing in it. They're really good. The school's got a great volleyball team. And so my wife and I and one of my sons, we decided we'd go over there and actually watch this game as it was being played. And whenever I go to that campus, and I go there plenty, but whenever I go there, for many reasons, it is a special place for me to visit. But one particular reason is the fact that my wife and I also attended that same university. And we met there as students. And so whenever I walk through that campus, I remember things from my past. There's always something that triggers a memory or a conversation or something like that. I remember what the property used to look like before some of the recent updates were made. I remember some fun experiences. I remember good conversations that I had with my friends. I even remember things that I learned from my professors, the valuable things that I was taught while I was attending classes there. I found that very useful. It comes back to my mind when I'm in certain spaces on the campus. And I also remember some teachable moments that happened during that season of my life, many of which occurred outside of the classroom. And one such memorable moment during my college years occurred when my car was parked very close to where I parked the other evening for that game. There's a lower level parking lot that's right by the school library. And I remember back, a few decades ago when I was a student on that campus, I remember being parked in a similar spot, right close to where I was parked the other evening. And I remember there being a particular day when I was parked there and I was in a rush. I don't remember what I was in a rush for. I don't remember what I was doing, but I needed to leave campus quickly and go someplace else. I got in my car. It was parked in that lower level parking lot by the library. And as I got in my car and as I prepared to back out of my space, I'm guessing that I must not have looked very carefully at what was going on around me because I almost hit another car. And it was a very startling experience. I still remember the other driver. He was a man who was about maybe 20 years older than I was. He might have even been older than that. But I remember him looking at me irritated. He was not very happy with my decision to quickly back out of the parking spot that I was in. And I actually waited for him to park and walk to the area that I was in before I left the parking lot because I actually just wanted to apologize to him for almost hitting his car and scaring him like I did. And he received my apology. I also remember him looking at me and kind of shaking his finger like this. And he shook his finger at me a little bit, and he kind of did so judgmentally. It was a little bit awkward, but at the same time, I felt like I at least owed him an apology. But afterward, I remember giving some thought to what had happened. And the truth is, when you look back at the situation, as I thought about it, we actually both bore some blame. It wasn't 100% my fault. It was certainly, in many respects, largely my fault, I think, but it wasn't 100% my fault because as I was rushing to leave, he was also rushing to get a parking spot. So he was driving in kind of quickly and not really paying attention. And I was pulling out and not paying attention as closely as I could have. And the reason I couldn't see him as I was thinking about it, as I pulled back, was because he was in my blind spot. I looked, but I didn't see him. He was in my blind spot. Now, I'm glad I realized what was going on in time to hit my brakes, because if I didn't, I probably would have hit his car, and that would have obviously resulted in an accident, been a big problem. And I realized what was happening in time to prevent that. But at the same time, the reason that this happened was because he was in my blind spot. And I think that the most common blind spot that most of us are used to experiencing on a daily basis would be the blind spot that we experience when we're driving. You see that when it comes to your mirrors and how they're positioned, and sometimes even just the shape of a vehicle and the way the windows are set. It can be sometimes difficult to see certain areas. The car I'm currently driving has two really bad blind spots, and it certainly concerns me. Although modern vehicles have warnings that if you're going to back up into something, it starts beeping, and so it gives some warning that there might be an obstruction or some sort of problem that you might be hitting if you keep backing up. And I think car blind spots and window blind spots might be some of the more obvious blind spots that we're used to, but there are many areas of life where our blind spots are probably less obvious to us. And I think some of us would probably notice, or could notice with with a little help, that some of us maybe have blind spots in other areas of our lives. For example, I think some of us have relational blind spots. So sometimes you may think, why do I have conflict with people? Well, there might be some relational blind spots that you're not noticing that it might be useful if somebody else points them out to you. I've also met some people, and you've probably met some people that fall into this category as well, who have blind spots in their personal hygiene. And I think, boy, I really wish someone would pull you aside and just explain how personal hygiene works. But there are some people in my day-to-day life that I think have a few blind spots there. Hopefully they don't think the same about me. I think it's also possible to struggle with blind spots in our vocations. So sometimes in our jobs, we don't notice certain things that would be helpful for us to notice. I think it's also possible to experience blind spots in our general outlook to life. There are some people that just have a perspective that really demonstrates that they're missing the greater point. And since blind spots are so common in all kinds of areas of life, should it really be a surprise to us when we experience them in the midst of the platforms that we're attempting to develop? This is kind of how we're wired. Sometimes we don't notice things. There are important things that we should notice, but we don't always notice them in all areas of life. So it really should not surprise us when we experience some level of a blind spot in the course of the online platform we're attempting to build. I don't think that should be a surprise at all. In fact, I think we've all got them. I've got some blind spots. You've got some blind spots. We all have them. They're not uncommon. There's always something we could do better or something we could do just differently that would have a positive impact on the platforms that we're building if we were just aware of what that blind spot happened to be and that improvement or that tweak that we could somehow make. But how can a blind spot that we're consistently missing become obvious to us? If there's something there that you're just not seeing, if there's something there that you're missing, if there's something that just persists and it's just not clicking for you, how can it start to become obvious to you? How can it become clear to you? I actually feel like there's a tool or a way that we can analyze whether or not a certain area might be a blind spot. And I'll also mention this too, if you're ever interested in doing any form of counseling or coaching. If you're doing some coaching in your platform, one of the things that people will come to you and ask for assistance with is identifying blind spots. And they're going to ask you to analyze what they're doing and help them figure out what's going wrong. Most blind spots require the intervention of another person to help us see. But there is a step before even getting others involved that can help us begin the process of figuring out what we're missing. Or if you're in the process of offering coaching, this is a step that you can invite the person you're coaching to begin taking. This is how you figure out where you've got a blind spot. It really starts with asking a very simple question. And the question is this. So listen carefully. This is it. It's important. Where has my platform plateaued? Where has my platform plateaued? If you can ask that question and then answer it honestly, it's going to help you discover where you may have a blind spot. Now, most likely, if you've been developing your platform for a little while, even if it's just a little while, you've probably experienced some level of success in a few areas. So maybe your podcast has experienced some growth. We were celebrating with some of our Platform Launchers Members Club last week and even this week some of the growth that they've experienced in their podcasts. Well, that's exciting. That's certainly something that we celebrate, and certainly something we enjoy hearing. So maybe you've started podcasting and that's experiencing a little growth. And maybe, you've dabbled into blogging. And so now the readership of your blog has started to expand. Well, that's all wonderful. And maybe now your social media is ticking up a little bit. That's certainly good. Or maybe you've even started earning some advertising revenue or some revenue from coaching or something similar to that. All wonderful things. That's all great. But I'm guessing that even if you can point to a few areas that are coming along in the development of your platform, you could probably also think of a few areas that aren't growing as quickly as you would like them to grow. Or maybe you're looking at them and saying, you know what, that particular area has plateaued. That particular area has stagnated entirely. And if you've noticed certain elements of your platform that are plateaued or stagnated, without realizing it or not, maybe you do realize it, I don't know, but you've probably done a good job. If you can identify those areas, you've probably done a good job of identifying areas where you may have blind spots that would benefit from an outside look. Notice the areas that have plateaued. Notice the areas that have stagnated. Notice the areas that you're struggling to gain traction that maybe at one point even had some traction. Now, generally speaking, I think it's reasonable for you to expect your platform to grow. And I think most of us would wish our platforms would grow quicker. I think just about all of us would say that. We wish that we had this many podcast downloads or this many blog reads or this much advertising revenue or whatever it may be. I think we all want our platforms to grow quicker than whatever it's growing. But if you've given your platform enough time for it to grow, so if you've allowed it to have enough time, and if you've remained very consistent in your creation of quality content, I would assume that in most cases, if those elements are there, so time, consistency, quality, I think that I could say that I would reasonably expect your numbers to be bumping up. Maybe they're not as high as you would like them to be, but I bet you they're bumping up. If you're consistent, if you're adding enough time to it, if you're devoting enough time to it, you've been doing it long enough, if the content that you're creating is quality. But if you're not seeing your numbers bump up, if that's not the case, if that's not something you're seeing, I think that means it's probably time to do one of the most difficult things for most people to do, and that's make a change. Now, I have to admit something to you. I admitted this to our members club before we went live here with the podcast. I will admit that I am not someone who loves to make changes. That's not something that I automatically jump up and down about and get excited about. And I don't know if you're someone that embraces change. Some people do. Most people don't. I think I fall into the category of embracing some change and not embracing other change. I think there's some areas of my life where change comes rather easily, but this is what I've discovered. Usually those areas where change comes easily, it tends to be areas that don't really rise to the top of my interests. It usually ends up being kind of secondary areas. But when it comes to my creative content, so things that I'm creating with my platform, things that I'm writing, things that I'm recording, I can be very hard to budge. That stuff feels personal to me. I'll admit that, right? Sometimes I'm right to take that posture, but sometimes I'm wrong. It could be hard to budge sometimes when it comes to creative content. Now, in the years since I've started writing and recording, I will also admit to you that I have received a lot of unsolicited advice from others. Just before the podcast went live here, we were talking with one of our members about some unsolicited advice he received from somebody via social media today. And we were joking about how awkward that could be at times. And I have to tell you, in the years since I started writing and recording, I have received a lot of unsolicited advice. And I'll also say this, and I think I'm honest in saying this, most of that unsolicited advice that I received, most of it was bad advice from those who did not understand what I was doing. They didn't have the same level of experience or the same level of success, but they wanted to chime in on my work. They wanted to chime in and offer an opinion. Well, I'll tell you this, and you probably already know it, but it's wise to filter out bad advice. But it can also be hard to discern which advice is good and which is bad when you're still in the early seasons of developing your platform. The best advice you'll receive, and the advice that will be easiest to trust, it won't come from people who don't understand what you're doing. The best advice will come from those who have succeeded at what you're trying to do. And, for example, I would never try to offer advice to someone trying to engineer a skyscraper. Okay, that's outside of my realm of expertise. I have no skyscraper engineering experience, but I'll happily offer advice for writers. I'll happily offer advice for podcasters. I'll also gladly receive advice from people who are seasoned in those activities and have a track record of success. Those are the people that I need help from. In fact, I actually pay good money for coaching and for counsel from people who have track records of success that impress me, and people that are willing to lovingly point out my blind spots without crushing my spirit. That's kind of the caveat. I want to see, have they succeeded at what they're trying to advise me to do? And are they willing to share that information with me and point out my blind spots without crushing my spirit in the process? Because the content that I'm creating, admittedly, I feel personally invested in the content I'm creating. I would suspect that most of us who create online content feel personally invested in the content we're creating. So it's wise to be a bit selective about the outside counsel you receive regarding it. But I'll just throw this out there as a question. If you're watching us via video, if you're listening via the podcast, are there people in your life that you would trust to help identify your blind spots? Do you have some people in your life that you feel like, I can trust them to identify my blind spots? I think it can be very hard to receive outside counsel when you're creating creative content like I've just described. You're pouring your heart into that content. Be very, very difficult to receive an outside opinion regarding it. And to some degree, I think we're all artists. To some degree, I think we all take our art personally. But if you can identify one or more areas where you have to say, in all honesty, my platform has either stagnated or plateaued in that particular area, if you can identify that, I think it might be time to seek some counsel from people you trust, from people that you are eager to listen to. Let them take a peek behind the curtain. Let them attempt to help you find some of those blind spots. I think if you do, you're going to experience one of three possible outcomes. And I think you're going to react in one of these three ways. I think one possible option is you'll decide after getting that counsel, you'll decide that you're satisfied with your present level of growth, and you'll choose not to make changes to what you're doing, at least for the moment. You'll say, I hear those changes. I will think about that. But for the moment, I think, maybe I'm just satisfied with the level of growth that I've currently experienced. And maybe it's okay that I remain at this plateau for right now. That's perfectly acceptable. In fact, there's probably a time to do that. And that might be one way that you respond. Another way you might respond is this. You'll have a hard time receiving that outside counsel, and hearing outside counsel will convince you that you're not really ready to make changes yet. Also perfectly understandable. It's human nature. It's sometimes difficult for us to make changes. I think it's often difficult for us to make changes, and you have to assess whether you're ready to actually make a change with what you're doing. I think a third response, though, is that you'll hear that outside counsel. You'll decide that you're frustrated enough with your lack of the lack of progress that you're seeing. So you'll take that outside counsel. You'll receive it willingly, and you'll make the changes that are necessary to identify your blind spots and your plateaus so that you can begin breaking through them. Now, again, I will admit that this is not one of the easiest things to do, but I'll also tell you, and this is the honest truth, and I know that you probably know this already, but there are people live on this call with me who could testify that this is something that they have also seen. Most successful entrepreneurs have a team of people in their corner whose goal is to point out blind spots and celebrate victories. So it's like a both type of context. But most successful entrepreneurs have that team. They have a group of people who they allow to point out their blind spots and suggest ideas and even celebrate their wins and celebrate their victories. You want to have people in your corner like that. I think successful entrepreneurs over time, when they begin to see the benefit of that, they learn not to take outside feedback as personally as they once did. And I think for this reason, many successful people, what they do is they meet with advisory groups or business masterminds or some small group of people that they trust that they're able to put together. And that group of people helps them refine what they're creating. I have personally found this helpful. This is something that I do in my personal life. I didn't do this for a very long time. For a long time, I would just create content in solitude, and I wouldn't really involve a whole lot of other people in that process. And I really wouldn't seek a whole lot of outside feedback on it. But over time, I've come to a spot where I've started to personally find it beneficial to have that outside feedback, to have people that I trust, people that I think are my favorite is to find people that I think are a few years ahead of where I want to be and a few years ahead of where I am, and I'll see if I can get on their radar. Sometimes I'll pay for coaching. Sometimes I'll pay to be part of their business groups, things like that, because they have valuable things that they can teach from their experience. And I want to learn. I want to grow. I want to do what I'm doing better so that I can serve the people I serve even better. And I would just throw it out there as someone who wants to be a lifelong learner. I would encourage you to be a lifelong learner. And I'd encourage you to consider incorporating something like this, like a business roundtable, a business mastermind, a small group of advisors, something like that. I'd encourage you to incorporate something like that into your business, because if you surround yourself with the right people, and if you stay open to at least hearing their feedback, you don't always have to jump and act immediately upon hearing it. Sometimes if you're like me, you just need a little while to process it. But if you'll at least stay open to hearing that feedback, I think you'll save yourself a lot of time. I think you'll save yourself a lot of money. And I think you'll save yourself a lot of frustration, because good friends like that are actively involved in what you're trying to build can help point out to you some blind spots that you're experiencing, and that can help you overcome stagnation, and it can help you overcome plateaus, and it can really help you level up the business that you're building or the platform that you're creating. I appreciate so much the camaraderie that I see within our group here in Platform Launchers. Many of us are doing that for each other. I think our group as a whole has the opportunity to do that for each other. We try and focus on good information that helps us build our platforms, good inspiration that helps us stay encouraged in the midst of sometimes feeling low, and good accountability that can really be useful in pointing out some of those blind spots and helping us overcome those plateaus. It's really, really useful. We'd love to invite you to be part of what we're doing here. You could stop by platformlaunchers.com. You could take a test drive of our members club. You could also see our launch plan course over there. You could also see a whole bunch of free content that we have there in the blog and in the past recordings of the podcasts. There's a ton of stuff over there. And if you're not on our newsletter list, I'd encourage you to just sign up to be on that newsletter list. You could see a sign up for that right on the front page of platformlaunchers.com. But you could also see an area where you can sign up at the base of any blog post. I have it in every single blog post on the site. And if you want to receive our weekly newsletter, I usually send it out sometime on Wednesday morning. And it's got some helpful tips and tricks and advice and encouragement for those of you that are trying to build an online platform. I'd love to be able to share that with you. Again, that's all at platformlaunchers.com. You could sign up with an email right there on the homepage or from any blog post on the site, and we'll be happy to include you in our weekly newsletter. But that's it for us this week. Thanks so much for checking us out and tuning in and watching this on YouTube or listening to us via your favorite podcast player. And we look forward to getting together with you again right here next week. Take care.